Good evening, everyone. I'm Donna Hill, assistant professor here at Medgar Evers College, and also serving as interim director of literary programs for the Center for Black Literature. So I want to thank you all for being here this evening for the Center's Women's History Month program, Kindred, an exploration of slavery's legacy. So just to give you a little background on what the conversation will be about this evening, stamped in our DNA is the legacy of our ancestors, who we were, who we are, and who we can become. Octavia Butler's groundbreaking speculative novel, Kindred, challenges us to embrace all those parts of ourselves and what tethers us as kin. Now, a television series, we welcome each of you to join us in conversation with Kindred executive producer Courtney Lee-Mitchell, MEC student scholar Tracey Squires, Medgar Evers assistant professor Dr. Mudiwa Pettus, and author of Afrofuturism fiction, Cathie Wright-Lewis, as they will be discussing this evening the important novel that introduces a new generation to the award-winning work of Octavia Butler. But before we begin this conversation, I would like to ask Dr. Brenda Green, the Executive Director for the Center for Black Literature, to say a few words.
Thank you, Professor Hill. Don't they look beautiful? Black women, yes. Women's History Month. Yes, thank you so much for coming. Thank you, faculty, staff, students, Center for Black Literature friends. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. And I'd like to thank Professor Hill for pulling this program together. I'd like to thank the Women's History Month Committee for giving us a space to have this program. I'd like to thank the Center for Black Literature team. We could not do it without them. In addition to Donna Hill, our interim literary director, Charlotte Hunter, our Director of Development External Programs is sitting right there, Amber Magruder, our Director of Operations, our PR team sitting in the front is Leah Bird, our Marketing and Management, Marketing and Communications Manager, our PR Director, April Silver, Communications and Managing Director, our interns. Octavia Butler is one of my favorite authors. I was introduced to her many years ago, first through Kindred and then through some of her other works. And reading her now is really timely. Reading Kindred now is really timely because Kindred, in addition to taking us back in time and forcing us to look at what our life could have been and how we have persisted and resisted through time, Kindred gives us some messages that we should think about in moving forward. So I'm excited to see what this program is about. I'd also like to share with you that this program is part of the John Oliver Killens reading series. It's one of our signature programs at the Center for Black Literature. And we bring together writers and scholars to read their work and to talk about issues related to their work. It comes once a month, and it is in honor of John Oliver Killens, who was writer in residence at Medgar Evers College back in 1986, and actually a few years before that. And as the writer in residence, his dream was to host a writers' conference every year to bring together writers to talk about the state of Black literature. And so he decided to host the National Black Writers Conference. We've had National Black Writers Conferences in 1986, 88, 91, 96, 2000, and then in 2002, I founded the Center for Black Literature to have as part of this goal to support Black writers and literature, but to provide a home for the National Black Writers Conference. I encourage you to visit our website, to look at our other programs, our youth programs, Re-envisioning Our Lives Through Literature. We have a Killens Journal of Arts and Letters. We also have a Wild Seas Writers Retreat. We just finished it. We have another one coming up. We have programs going on every month throughout the year, and we are really, really committed to working with students, working with the community, working with faculty and staff, and ensuring that our presence is felt. And in these times, as I said, it's more important than ever. When you have attacks against books, you have censorship, you have people saying you can't read Toni Morrison, it should be on the banned books list. You know, and I'm sure that some of Octavia Butler's books will be on the banned books list. So speculative fiction is here. It's a way to tell our stories, and I thank you again for coming out.
So I mentioned all of the panelists earlier, but I want to give you a little background on each of them. So Tracey Squires is a senior English and cross-cultural literature student at Medgar Evers College. Her interests are centered in Black feminist discourses, studies on gender, and writings of and about the diaspora. One can find her work in the Center of Black Literature's musings, so please go to the Center for Black Literature's website and check out the musings and writings from our students. When she's not reading another story, she is writing her own or fashioning art. And Dr. Mudiwa Pettus is an assistant professor of English composition and rhetoric at Medgar Evers College. Her research interests are located at the intersections of rhetorical education, Black intellectual histories, and late 19th and early 20th century African American literature. Her writing appears in Rhetoric Review, the Journal of Multimodal Rhetorics, Writers, Craft, and Context, and other venues. Dr. Pettus. Speculative fiction author Cathie Wright-Lewis penned and published Mara's Seed, Why Hope Lives Beyond Project Walls, Passion's Pride, Return to Dawning, Mama Relly and Mama Relly's Lessons, children's book series, and a host of poetry anthologies and short stories. Her allegorical Afrofuturism works to uncover the history of African Americans in New York City, honors the African American ancestors who built the city and those who fought for equality amid centuries of disenfranchisement and massacres. For over 35 years, Wright-Lewis served Brooklyn youth, adults, and teachers as a high school education mentor, UFT teacher, trainer, and English professor. She continues to serve through Medgar Evers College's Center for Black Literature's program as director of the Re-envisioning Our Lives Through Literature role, and as executive director of her nonprofit Power in the Pen Writing Workshop Incorporated. And our featured speaker, Courtney Lee-Mitchell. Courtney is a film and television producer based in New York City. She served as executive director on the recent television show Kindred, based on the novel by Octavia Butler. Prior to forming her production company, Fourth Power Films, Courtney worked in development for New York City-based production company Cine Mosaic, where she worked on films such as The Reluctant Fundamentalist and Notorious. She is a graduate of UCLA School of Law and Bard College and has been a Harlem Stage Board member since 2014 and represents the Manhattan Borough President on the board of Jazz at Lincoln Center. So please welcome our guest. Kindred is a novel that stands head and shoulders above all the others in the genre. So when it came out, it was something that was never seen before. It's part memoir, part fantasy, and the fictional conventions of time travel. But to try to understand what Butler did with Kindred that has never been done before, we need to understand the fundamentals of the speculative and science fiction genres. So for me, science fiction was Star Wars, Lost in Space, Back to the Future, War of the Worlds, Aliens 1, 2, 3, 4. But it was also so much more than that. So what is this genre made of? And what are the pieces of the puzzle that make speculative and science fiction?
I'm not a writer, so I would defer to someone who actually writes
So
in
for
the genre.
yeah, for me, science fiction.
Like,
Oh, I'm sorry. Slide it over. Can you repeat the question, please, Professor Hill?
Okay, so what is the genre? What is the genre?
What is the
made of?
genre?
What are some of the pieces of the puzzle that make speculative and science fiction what it is?
For me, science fiction is whenever something is happening that's not usual. Okay, people are flying. Okay, people are moving and traveling in time. Machines are talking. Anything you find on Twilight Zone, all of the things that appear to be supernatural, but of course behind them is also a possibility of truth. So to me that's science fiction. Ray Bradbury. I fell in love with H.G. Wells, the time traveler and all of those types of stories, those are, considered science fiction.
Okay.
What should not happen, but it does.
Anybody want to add anything?
Yes, and for me, I think about the broad category of speculative fiction is literature, broadly defined, so fiction, film, different types of media, imagining the world as it could have been or what it might be. And so I like to think of it broadly because so many different artists and writers are playing with the genre. And so I like to leave it open.
Yeah, I would add that for many writers, maybe not all, and I think we see it a lot in television and film, that science fiction, speculative fiction allows them to critique what's happening in the present day, but in a way that, maybe entertaining is the wrong word, but in a way that it can reach the largest, widest possible audience, so that they can sort of take that issue and be able to understand it in a different way, in a different form.
Just to add to Dr. Pettus's point, for me, I would have to agree. Science fiction is a broad category for a number of things that don't often fall under it. And even with Kindred, as I was reading on Octavia Butler in preparation for this discussion, I read that she did an interview with Black Scholar once, and she said that she wouldn't consider Kindred a science fiction novel, but rather a grim fantasy. And we often consider a lot of things science fiction, and we read it. I myself, when I first read Kindred, I read it as a science fiction novel. So, as Dr. Pettus said, it's a broad umbrella for a number of things to fall under.
And then we also know too that in the publishing world, there has to be a category. So we have to put you somewhere. So even though, Octavia Butler may not have felt that that's where her book belonged, the publishers decided, well, this is where it's going to go. And so this is the umbrella we're going to put you under. So with that in mind, and each of you come to understand the genre in your own way, what brought you to be a reader of this particular genre?
For me, I'll just start. I'm sorry. I as a kid, there was this anthology my English teacher gave us in maybe 6th or 7th grade. I can't even remember the name of it. It wasn't even a title. It was just like several of them, volumes, and they had all these beautiful short stories in them. And there was one particular story where it starts off and the man is in the bathroom talking to his razor. And the razor said, I told you your wife is trying to kill you. You need to watch her. And I was completely fascinated, so I said, what? And it turned out the wife her hairbrush was trying to tell her her husband was trying to kill her. So they both ended up killing each other. I was like, who wrote this? And it gave me this whole different outlook on writing and what different books can do for you and make you think, so it really started me. And of course, then I love Twilight Zone and anything that seemed, out of the ordinary, unexplained. But that's where it started for me with that story. Yeah. I don't even know the name of it, but
Yeah. I know the Twilight Zone, the one that sticks with me the most is the doll.
Oh,
Yeah.
Tina.
I'm going to
Talking
do it.
Tina. Yes,
Talking
yeah.
Tina. Yes, I will never forget that. And I'm just like totally convinced that something was possible.
Yeah.
The little dog laying on the stairs and she got it. So since we have kind of like a bit of basic understanding of what the foundation and some of the elements of speculative and science fiction is, how is Black science fiction different? How does it bend the genre beyond just having Black people as major players in the storyline? What does it do differently?
I mean, I'm not quite sure this really answers the question, but I remember reading something that Octavia Butler said that, you know, 'cause she was a science fiction fan herself, but you rarely saw Black people in that science fiction. And she, you know, she basically felt like that's ridiculous. Like, we're here, we should be in the fiction. We should see ourselves in the science fiction as well. And, you know, going back to sort of what brought me to science fiction reading is, I have to say, it would be film and television. It was a Star Trek. If you think about, you know, what he would, I can't remember his name right now, but what the creator of Star Trek was trying to do, a future where people of all different races, you know, or species, I guess, were like in the future together. And you heard, you know, it's like you heard in Chekhov and I can't remember all their Spock. And so, you know, that's a future where everyone was present in that future. And Octavia Butler was like, well, Black people should be in that as well. And then, of course, there's the question of, you know, what you're trying to say with science fiction. And I think she wanted to take her science fiction to discuss sort of, you know, the issues related to being Black in America and the world, but put it in a science fiction setting, because she felt like that was potentially the best way to get across to a broader audience what she felt were issues related to Black people in the future, or in Kindred's case, you know, in the past, and how it relates to the present. So I don't know if it really answers your question, but I think it's, you know, sort of related.
Yeah, so I was just gonna say, I think for me, Black speculative fiction gets us to ask questions about the genre and about the world in ways that wouldn't necessarily be the case if Black people weren't asking those questions. So even if we think about Kindred, and it's to step beyond speculative fiction, we have this conversation around, like, if you ask someone, oh, what period would you want to travel to? If you ask someone who is not racialized, they're not going to have any kind of, oh, they can just kind of travel back to any period. But if you ask someone who's Black, what period are you going to travel to? There are all these questions around kind of safety and health and risk and history. And so I really think Black speculative fiction gets us to ask questions that other authors don't get us to. And so they call Black speculative fiction as readers to also consider the world from different viewpoints that oftentimes are not considered, under-examined and overlooked.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with Kindred being all of these different things that, you know, that we mentioned, it might also be considered a neo-slave narrative, in that it is a fictionalized mutation of autobiographies of the 19th century Americans who lived as slaves. So while it reads sometimes like a memoir that harkens back to books like Harriet Jacobs' Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl, then takes on the fictional attributes like Margaret Walker's Jubilee and Toni Morrison's Beloved. But then it throws in time travel. So talk about your impressions and your interpretations of the many techniques that Butler employed in the novel, and what made them work for you or maybe not work for you as a reader. How much suspension of disbelief did it take for you to dive into this novel and enjoy it?
Well, what I loved that she was doing, she was doing several things at once. One, she's making us honor our ancestors who have been, you know, through slavery, and she also was honoring reading, literacy. That was a major point, a major motif in the book, and also in the series. Everything was about like your freedom can come through your ability to read and write, and I think that was a hell of a message for people now, where we have people who don't want to read, who barely want to pick up a book. And, no one wants to think that, I'll finish a whole book. That's absurd. We couldn't read before. It was against the law. Now, I did think that her reading, you could have been killed for reading. So it was highlighted, but at the same time, it was kind of not realistic because, she was allowed to read to Rufus. Dana was allowed to read to Rufus. But I appreciated what she was doing there, very, very much so. So I think that was a major, major point that can't be overlooked. And I also think that, she's the queen of Afrofuturism. And I think that the difference between Afrofuturism and speculative or anything else that we want to call Black sci-fi is that the intention is to go to the past, re-examine it, and then look at the future because we want to make sure we change it. So we're looking at everything, the full spectrum, and that's what she did, and everybody, people they love her all over for that. So that just gives us a chance. It gives us hope to know we're not going to be written out of history. We're not going to be, killed off completely. We will be in the future, So that was really important for her. That's what she's telling us, look forward to the future. You can have one. Maybe you need to make it, for it to happen. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because, in the way that history is taught, Black people they were slaves. Then they disappeared.
See.
Then they reappeared during the Civil Rights Movement, and then they disappeared again.
Right.
So where are we in the
Right.
mix? And we've been here all along, and we'll be here in the future. So she definitely allows us to do that. I'll keep that question open. What for each of you made the story work or not work? Like one of the things that you said, you had a little issue with, her reading to Rufus.
Or getting away with it. I'll say that, getting away with it.
Yeah.
Not her reading, but her getting away with it, because that did happen to several people.
Right.
But Nat Turner, of course, and many others. But you could be whipped severely. None of that happened. She, because she was reading, they allowed it. So that was kind of, hard to believe that would happen. But we went along with it because it was great to see. I agreed with it. So
I think one, Brandon Jacobs Jenkins, who was the showrunner for Kindred, went to her archives in Pasadena. And I think, looked at traced back like what she wanted to try and put the book, what she didn't, things that she thought worked and didn't work. As much as we think, oh my God, it's this great book, she had doubts about whether she pulled off what she wanted to pull off. But he said that one of the things he saw was like the reason she chose Maryland specifically is one, someone trying to escape to the north. You're in Maryland, you're almost there.
Yeah.
But also, they didn't, I don't want to say they were easier, but because they were almost in the north, you had more free Black people who worked in towns. So the potential for a slave who does not belong to that. Remember that in the story, Dana is Kevin's. They have to pretend she's Kevin's slave. So the fact that she knew how to read, they were able to couch that in she belonged to this northern guy who, and we would never want her to teach our people to read, but we're gonna take advantage of the fact that she has it. So it's not so much they're accepting it and allowing it, but if they had been in Georgia, I don't know if it would have, if it worked. The fact that it was in Maryland, I think, is one of the reasons why it didn't have as strong a resistance to letting her read to Rufus as it would have if they were in further into the deep south.
Yeah.
Even though, remember, he didn't want her to teach anyone on his farm, on the plantation. He didn't want his slaves, his enslaved people to read.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of stick with that just a little bit. So, you talked about, how the showrunner, went through the archives and looked through things. Can you talk just a little bit about some of the decisions that were made to bring this book to life? Like, of course, in any novel, you can't do everything. And you have to be sort of very strategic about what you can show, what you can't show. So what can you just kind of tell us a little bit about what were some of the decisions that were made?
So when I initially optioned the book and was trying to make it, I was actually trying to make it as a movie, not as a television show. Things take a very long time and things shift and it became a television show. But one of the things that I had already wanted to happen is that it be brought to present day and not be done and not have it be set in 1976. That was also what Brandon had in mind. So that's the first sort of big change. And our reasoning for that was the book was published in 1979, which means she was probably writing it in 1976. The story is of a present day Black woman. For her, a present day Black woman is a woman from the mid 70s. And, picking a year where there was something historical going on. That was the bicentennial. It was I remember, it was a big deal. It was the bicentennial. So, moving it to present day was sort of taking on the mindset if she was writing this today and she wanted to be about a present day Black woman, she wouldn't have said it in 1976. She'd said it in, our present. And actually Brandon came onto the project in 2015, 2016. So 2016 seemed a reasonable time. And also 2016 was an election year of unhappy consequences. But that gave us a sort of historical thing to sort of keep in the back of our mind in the story when you're seeing these two people and that like about a month later, 45 is going to be elected, and the way people talk about people and the way people, all the stuff that's been happening ever since, it's, a lot of it is because of 45 getting away with it. And so we thought, having it be 2016 just made sense from a story perspective. And then of course, once you have a present day story, then you have to sort of shift everything, a lot of things, who are these characters if they're characters in 2016 versus if they're characters in 1976. So then that affects like who Dana and Kevin are as individuals. It affected for Brandon, what their relationship is in 2016 versus what their relationship was in 1976. So in 1976, they are married at the time that the events unfold, though we do get a window into how they met. When they met, he was a struggling writer. They were both doing temp work in a I can't remember if it's a storage facility or something, but and she was in her mid-20s and he's like in his 30s, prematurely gray. And so, but Brandon wanted to sort of, what would they be like today? And 26-year-olds in LA and New York aren't married necessarily, right? Now he's a struggling musician in his early 30s, and she's someone who sort of, her life is all sort of, she's not quite sure what she wants to be, but she thinks she wants to be a TV writer, soap opera writer. So they're not married. They've just started their relationship. And one of the things that he sort of noted, and I can't remember if she mentioned this in the archives or if it's something that Brandon noticed as well, is that one of the reasons why Kevin is white is because we weren't that far from Loving versus Virginia. And so the concept of a mixed race couple sort of out and about and proud of being that, but sort of separate, isolated from their families. They didn't really seem to have very many friends. So it's sort of a new, not new, but something that was sort of a little bit new to investigate. So she wanted to investigate them as a married couple. And again, 2016, he's like, they wouldn't necessarily be married. he wanted to see their relationship unfold with this as this, the first date from hell, basically, right? It's like they just get to know each other and he gets pulled in, but he's like this progressive, Brooklyn, LA person. And I don't remember if we kept it in the show as it shows up, but his sister says he's always trying to help these he's always bringing home the animal. He's always bringing home like the broken bird. Like he thinks of himself as someone who like fixes and takes care of. And so that's one of the reasons why, he doesn't abandon her immediately when this happens, because he thinks of himself as this good progressive person who's going to like make sure that she is okay. And of course, like I said, it's the first date from hell or second date from hell or whatever, because they can't even figure out because they're going back in time. The time is just like, have they been together for a week or have they been together for 5 hours? So.
Yeah. So that's a lot of changing, and as readers, we want the purity of the novel. It's like, and so, but of course, behind the scenes, you have to make certain decisions that make sense. For the rest of, for the production of it. So thank you for that. So we talked about Dana, right? And so she's the main character in this very harrowing journey. So being kidnapped through time. And she's tossed into this unknown place and thrown in among people whose way of life was unthinkable. And all of this could stand as a metaphor, sort of, for her ancestors' tumultuous and disorienting journey to a foreign land. So she finds herself in a past that she's only read about. What did she and you as a reader come to understand from the people that she met and the atrocities she witnessed and endured? What did you come to understand?
Can I? Because it actually relates to the narrative you just gave to us, Courtney. So it was really interesting that watching the show, I saw that it was set in 2016. So the first time I taught Kindred was in 2016 at Penn State, and it was in a course called Slavery and the Literary Imagination. And we started that course, and of course the election happened, and the students and I had such a hard time dealing with the subject matter in that social context. And we were talking about just kind of how all of these logics and institutions and systems that kind of were birthed through enslavement are still with us today. And kind of what that means for kind of time not being linear. So this is also related to a conversation that you asked earlier, like, did it take much suspension of disbelief? And so coming out of a Black studies tradition, we always talk about time is not being linear, right? So in the present, you're never actually in the present. You're always engulfed in the past, and kind of time is always flexible. And so I think as a reader, Dana really is a surrogate for us to think about kind of what does it mean to actually grapple with this history of enslavement that involves all of us, right? So, this history doesn't just belong to Dana or our ancestors or Black people. So we see that Kevin is also pulled in. And so I think kind of this conversation around kind of how our present is never actually the present is the combination of all time really helped me think about kind of the fact that I and everyone really has to attend to our shared history.
In one part of the novel, when Dana and Kevin have once again returned from the past and back to the present, Dana says to Kevin, "I never realized how easily people could be trained to accept slavery." So do we also in the 21st century still have conditioned responses to slavery? So this kind of ties into, what you were saying before. So are we conditioned? Do we have conditioned responses to slavery? And her whole idea, I never believed how easily it was for them to sort of like accept this life.
I think it's funny because you're saying 2016 and then the book is 2016 and here was Trump talking about what we're going to go back to how it used to be. We're going to, right, Because that is exactly what the dream is for those who have that belief system that, there needs the white man's paradise and black people should be slaves and, make America great again because that's what the original America was. So I think that I would have tied all, to me, it was all tied in together, probably, and you guys and what you were thinking about doing. And that's what Octavia Butler wanted us to think about too. Look at how it's still here and how they can train. Rufus was being trained, all throughout the book. He's being trained. As evil as his father was, who else was he going to become like? Okay, who was he supposed to, that was his mentor. That's who he's looking up to. So as long as you're training, you're going to get this attitude and you're going to get this, as much as he had loved Alice supposedly and loved Dana, he was ready, at the end of the book. Now, in the series, we didn't see that yet, but in the book, of course, at the end, he's attempting to rape her. She watches him, every time she comes back, he's older. And then you have this grown man who you helped, who you thought you had a friendship with, who's your ancestor, and he's trying to rape you. I think that's, she was definitely showing us America. I don't think she thought that we would ever be able to change that because it's so woven into the tapestry of what we are. Yeah.
Going back to your question earlier on what works in the novel, for me, I found the richness that Octavia Butler presented her Black characters, especially in the enslaved community with Sarah and the mute housemaid and all the other Black enslaved persons that lived on the Wayleyan plantation. That was actually the thing that drew me to the novel. Let me just go off on a tangent to that earlier question first. So the first time I read Kindred was in 2019. I was not in college as yet, so I was just reading it for recreational purposes. And I remember being so taken aback by the main character being a woman. That was the first time I had ever read a science fiction novel that had a Black character, much less a Black main character who was a woman as well. And that's something that really works. A lot of the books that we read that are science fiction that offer Black characters, they do so as signposts or with an agenda or just to be didactic, to make a point, to say, well, I'm not racist, here's a Black character. And Kindred was not that for me. The Black person was there because they were there. And that did something for me as a young Black woman and a young aspiring writer. And also to what you asked earlier on the system of slavery and just existing within it. At one point in the novel, we see Dana taking back books or reading books. She got some books from her husband, Kevin, who went to the library. And she was studying all of these different books on slavery. And at one point, she comes to this realization that these books could not have prepared her. And I think that's especially profound. To your point, Cathie, on literacy, even with literacy, she was still unprepared for the reality that is slavery. And that is something that we have to remain cognizant of. Because even though we are in a different time as Dana is in 1976, going back is an entirely different story. We can think about these people accepting their conditions and being humiliated and say, why are they doing this? But we really don't know. It took a lot from them as not just characters, as people who actually existed, people who these characters are modeled off of. It took a lot from them to exist in their enslaved positions and exist in that humiliation. And also, at one point in the novel, when Kevin was left for 5 years in the plantation in the 19th century, if I'm correct, he becomes, although he's helping with the Underground Railroad, Dana finds a semblance between him and Rufus, and she thinks of him as being not complicit, but getting too accustomed to the ways in which, that way of life operated. And I think it is very easy for us to remain complicit in systems that benefit us, where we are not the ones being oppressed. And it doesn't matter if you're a liberal, progressive person, placed in certain situations. It would take a lot for you to step out and actually risk yourself and not be complicit in the system. Complicity is quite easy. That's it for me.
Well, it's about survival.
Yes.
You know, it's like, you know, one of the reasons she, you know, wrote it this way was because I can't remember if she was teaching a class or she was in a class, and there was another student, I think it was a male, who said, oh, if I went back in time, I would do this, that, and the other. And she's like, no, you wouldn't. I mean, and if you did, you'd be dead, you know? And it's like, that's the thing. It's like Dana is a present day Black woman who is used to being able to talk to whomever she wants to, the way she wants to do it. She's educated, you know, she's, you know, well-read, well-spoken, the whole 9 yards. And she's, you know, she's done for herself. And so now she's pulled in back in time. And, you know, at first she can't, you know, she's talking to Tom as if she's talking to someone in the present day. And, you know, she learns that you can't do that. And even for Kevin, it's like he has to witness this interaction between the white people on the plantation and Dana and be like, what's going on? And he can't do anything about it because he has to slip in to gear as well. And she has to constantly remind herself that I can't talk I can't talk to them the way I want to. I can't look them in the eye. You know, I have to keep my head down. I have to sleep, you know, in conditions and food conditions. And, you know, and also the way, you know, they have in the Sarah character, because we have this concept of, you know, Uncle Toms and Mammies and how they could do this, that, and the other. And it's just like, these people are trying to survive. You know, Sarah's character, like, they sold off all of her kids except for the one girl who is mute. And it's like, her goal is to keep her daughter near her, keep her alive, and not be separated. And she will do what she needs to do in order for that to happen. And it's like, we can't take today's sensibilities and today's morals and put that on people who are really just trying to get by day by day. And yes, there were those who had the gumption, had the foresight, had the ability to try to buck the system, and they did, and they fought, and they did underhanded things, and they, you know, tried to get rebellions and all that kind of stuff. That definitely happened too. But those, you know, those are special individuals. You know, we are all not going to be Harriet Tubman in that system, because most of us just really want to survive, you know, the next day and keep our families together. And that's why it becomes so easy to get pulled in and to be that way, because you're just trying to get from one day to the next, you know?
Yeah, all the concessions that she had to make in order just to survive. And she had to come to understand, like, so many of, you touched on it a little bit before, so many of our people today, especially our young people, oh, if I was back in slavery, this is what I would have done, and I would have never, they couldn't have done this to me. Right. And it's not true. That's right. Right? You get whipped, you get your foot cut off, blinded, all kinds of things like that. And so Dana had to come to understand, all of the things that she had become used to, in the 21st century were not applicable to her anymore. And what was she going to do in order to survive this, so that she can get back home, if that were to be the case, and all of the moral choices, that she had to make as well. So one of the central questions of the novel is, can you travel back a century and a half and kill your great-great-grandfather and still be born? Right? Is it possible for the future to influence the past as it is for the past to shape the future? Yet at the same time, Kevin and Dana say they can't change history. So with that belief, then what do you believe is Butler's purpose in telling the story? If her two main characters don't believe that they can affect any kind of change, why is she telling this story? Why does she feel that it was necessary to tell this story? And why do we as readers need to go on this journey with her?
Well, she saved her own life. You know, that was the main objective, because she if she would not exist without her ancestors. None of us would exist without our ancestors, right? So if her mother, once her mother was born, her grandmother, right? Alice is the grandmother, right? So once she was born, then it was safe for her to get rid of him, Waylon, but she is just trying to save her own life. It sounds really simple, but I think that's one of the most powerful points of the whole story. We can save ourselves. So it is necessary to go back. It is necessary. It's Sankofa. Go back, fetch it, find out who you are, find out what powers we have. Some people don't understand why I read some of the reviews, why is she going back? No, she needed to go back, and it served a purpose. And at the same time, she explained how some things do work spiritually, so she didn't go too far into the spirituality, but just in the book, but in the series, it definitely was very spiritual. So I thought that was a major difference. It was very, very spiritual, and they thought she was a witch, because someone had seen, and then the mother travels back in time. So the series goes in a whole different direction as far as I'm concerned with that, but it's possible, and it was necessary. I think it was very necessary to save yourself. So to me, that was the message she was saying. You're a strong Black woman, and you could endure, you could go back, you could save yourself, and you must do so that you can exist now.
Mm-hmm.
And Donna, this question just made me think about it. So a few weeks ago, maybe a month or so, BAM, the Brooklyn Academy of Music, they were showing a James Baldwin documentary series. And there's a moment where the interviewer asks James Baldwin, like, what is your role? And he answers to be a witness. And I think, there are different roles to be played at different times, right? So even if we can't go back and change history, there is a significance to being a witness to the atrocities, to the ugliness, and not to turn away. So I think, too, again, this book calls readers to do something, right? To actually attend to the history and not just look away from it and act like it didn't happen. So.
And they actually did try to change history, basically trying to see if they could be influential in Rufus's life in a way that could change his relationship to the people on the plantation. They wanted to see if they could raise him as a present, a white kid who actually is sympathetic with Black people and potentially would be someone who would release the enslaved people on the plantation once he was old enough to do so. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way. So because, nature, nurture, wherever it was, they weren't able to make a deep enough, influence on him. But that was in a way an attempt to change, because that could have changed the lives of every single person on that plantation had it worked out that way,
But maybe it was supposed to remain the way that it was.
Yeah, because you can't change. Yeah.
So I want to go back to, we talked a little bit before about, Kevin being this white man. So the novel is primarily about, the Black experience, essentially, right? So the Black experience in the antebellum South. So why do you believe that Butler felt that it was important to make Dana's mate in present day, but her husband, in the early iterations, a white man? Why was that important of all things? That's a trick question.
Yeah, that's a trick question. I'm going to jump on it first again. Now, Kevin in the book is very different from Kevin in the series. Very, very different. So they're not married, but he's a wuss. He is. I'm like, what is his problem? Why can't he's not strong at all. He's not a strong character, and he looks like he's going to cry every other second. We're like, get it together, man. He's like, can we leave now? Damn, can we, I mean, on one hand, it added a little humor, and a little too much humor, and then we needed that levity for how serious it was, so I did appreciate it. But I think that she wanted us to see that even in a mixed race couple, what this man, he starts changing in the book. And as nice as he was, as much as of a good husband as he was, the longer he was there, the more he was being influenced by this, power structure. He can, now I could do anything, because the slave owners, these men, they did whatever they wanted to whomever they wanted, and they got away with everything. And that was a different way of thinking for him. So I think it was just a way of her showing us that it could happen. But that once somebody's in that mindset, what it does to them, it could take a decent man and make him a bad man. I think that she wanted us to see that, and yeah. I'll give somebody else a chance.
With a book as complex and multi-layered and revered as Kindred, Courtney, can you tell us what it came about as a series? We can't get to see the rest of the series.
Yeah, because it is not picked up. It was not picked up for a second season.
It was.
It was not picked up for a second season.
Right. So, what do you have plans?
Yeah.
For the rest of it?
We are trying to find a new home for it. I mean, there's a lot that goes into that, because it means another network would have to take over, the finances of that, cast availability becomes an issue, and the writers. So it's more complicated than just
Just move it
stars. Yeah, the stars come and take it. Yeah, it's much more complicated than that. But what I will say is interesting because you've seen the whole thing, right? You saw the last episode, which is quite the cliffhanger.
Yes, it is.
But I think at the very end of it, you see just a snippet of how Kevin has gotten different in the time that he gets stuck in the past. Because there's a sternness about his face that didn't exist before, because at this point he's been there a while. Because it ends when he gets stuck in the past. And so, we were hoping, that's a cliffhanger, because we were hoping we would be able to, address that, but as well as the present day story and stuff. So, so we are trying to, see what we can do. We're working on it. But yeah, I mean, I had, optioned it many, many years ago. I read the book in 2008, and I optioned it. I finally was able to option in 2011. Was trying to make it as a movie, and couldn't get anyone interested in it. And then finally, 2015, 2016, Brandon had Protozoa, which is Darren Aronofsky's production company, wanted to do something with Brandon. And Brandon, who had already, he'd won a MacArthur Fellowship, or he won a MacArthur Fellowship just afterward, but he had done several plays that dealt with the issue of slavery, and wanted to make Kindred. And so it became a television show because they wanted to do it as a television series instead of as a film, because Brandon thought that, he could expand upon it, deal with, some of the things, again, when he went into the archive, some of the things that she had sort of considered, but you can only do so much in a book, right? You can't do everything. Whereas in a series, you have the time to deal with certain things. Also in a series, when you're converting medium, you decide that certain things play well and certain things don't. You have to show, you can't tell. So I think, interior thoughts don't really work on screen. So you have to sort of figure out a different way to say the same thing, but in sort of showing it rather than sort of the person talking to themselves, And so that is, why it became a television series rather than a feature film or even a limited series, because he really wanted to expand on this, idea of the mother, because she had toyed with the idea of ancestors. And also there was, I believe he said that he saw something in her notes along the lines, at one point in time, she sort of thought of Dana as an ancestor of maybe one of the characters in Purple, the main character in Purple.
Oh, really?
So like potentially, like the idea of like who she is actually the ancestor of someone else in one of her other series. And so there was at one point this concept of, things being handed down from generation to generation. And I think that, and she, so I think that's where the idea of having a mother to show that was something that there was a familial connection to this ability to be pulled back in time. And so he just sort of took these, like all the changes in the show, even if they're not in the book, there's